Hi everyone, let's talk about creative writing today and getting students to leverage symbolism in their stories. Now, this is a fantastic way to give students purpose because they are thinking clearly about the main idea they want to convey to their audience. So that's their purpose. So they're also thinking obviously about idea and audience, but it also gives them a way to develop their ideas by embedding symbols throughout their story. So let's talk about symbolism, and then we'll talk about some simple steps to help students use symbolism for a great writing task. Right, I'd begin with the one-off symbols, the symbols that have one specific meaning. For example, your wheelchair signs. So they represent the idea that there is wheelchair accessibility. Road signs, the merging lane sign, the giveaway signs, our everyday symbols, right? So the recycling symbol, the danger hazardous chemicals symbol. Tap into students' love of their phones with looking at the symbol of the little text message bubble, things like that. So these are everyday symbols and they mean just one thing. So it might be a fun, perhaps homework activity to get them to photograph a whole lot of symbols that they see in their everyday life, and they could feed those into a shared Google Doc, or rather a shared Google slide that you've set up for your classroom. Make sure you use slides or Microsoft PowerPoint, because then students can pop their images anywhere on the page and they don't move around. But that might be a really nice introduction to symbolism or symbols more. Okay, let's get into thematic symbols next. So thematic symbols are often universally recognized, although we'll talk about that in a minute as well. So our basic things like our hearts and our roses, as I mentioned before, crosses, skulls, doves, rainbows, the color red, water, and so on. So these are generally universally recognized. Now, if you want a fantastic little example to look at with universal symbols or thematic symbols to start your kids off with, look at the Amnesty International symbol, where they have the lit candle, obviously representing the idea of hope and life and warmth, which is, of course, surrounded by barbed wire, representing torture, cruelty, and entrapment. So that is a fantastic way to start students off on thematic symbolism. Now, symbolism is a fantastic way to reinforce students' understanding of connotations, because, of course, it's how we develop symbols to represent ideas. So, for example, take our rose. You know, that became a symbolism from romance, from the old days, the good old days, when the guy used to pick the girl up for dinner and actually take her out for dinner and used to present her with a bunch of roses. Okay, so that whole romantic ideal in that event. So that became symbolic, the rose became symbolic of love and romance. So connotations are key. So when students are maybe even inventing their own symbols, they need to think, oh, what do I associate with this? So now, when we're talking about thematic symbolism, it's really important for seniors in particular to appreciate a couple of things. Firstly, thematic symbols can represent a whole range of things, ideas underneath an umbrella idea. So, for example, your skull and crossbones might represent piracy, but it also represents fear, violence, a no-go zone, danger, and all of those things in between. So there's a range of feelings of people, of events, and everything that can be part of that symbol. By the same token, the skull and crossbones can also represent a bit of fun, adventure. Think of Pirates of the Caribbean, perhaps even comedy, like sort of that make-believe childlike idea. So a couple of different things there. Water can represent so cleansing, purity, a new beginning, life, but change the context, and it can mean a feeling of overwhelm, of drowning. So remember that. So there's that umbrella idea. So everything underneath that, a thematic symbol is all encompassing, but also it will depend on the context as to what it represents. Okay, the other thing to think about is how culture affects how we understand a symbol. So, for example, in some cultures, a lot of Western cultures, black is symbolic of the idea of death and mourning, whereas in other cultures, white is what represents death and mourning. All right, so the other thing is symbols change throughout the years. For example, the rainbow now means something quite different to what it did 100 years ago, 50 years ago even. Symbols can mean different things to different age groups. And if you don't believe me, just have a think about the aubergine symbol, the aubergine emoji, classic. That's a fun one to think about with your students, isn't it? So culture, the years, the era and age groups all give us different understandings of symbols. Now, let's get our students using symbolism in their creative writing. So this is a fantastic way to get them to produce something that's powerful and purposeful. So first of all, students need to be clear on what message they want to convey. As I said before, they'll be aware of the audience and they're aware of the idea. So I always, as you know, when I get students to talk about an idea, I get them to use the word that. So the idea is that, and it gets them to write about the idea in a full sentence. So you could give them the starter. So I want my audience to understand the idea that, or I want to tell my audience that. So give them that starter and then they fill it in, and that's going to be the idea that they are going to convey in their story. The second step is that students can then think about an overview. So an example of an idea might be, I want to tell my audience that it's important to look at the past in order to know where you're heading in the future, or whatever, know where you're heading. So that's fine. So an overview, that's the only way I can think to say it. You'll probably think of something better, but I want to think, okay, how can I represent that? Now, my idea has two parts to it, the idea of the past and the future. So what things represent, where I belong in the past, or what was meaningful in my past. But so I will think of symbols to represent that, but I can also find symbols to represent a future, like pathways and things like that. So students need to just summarize, shall we say, their idea in one or two words, and then think about symbols that will go with that. Now, I've done up a freebie and I'll link that below. It's also available if you log into our website, of course, and it will be available in our TPT store. So in that freebie, I get students to think about, okay, what colours could represent this idea, what songs, what animals, what food, drink, everything, celestial bodies, objects. What else? Have a look at my blog. Oh, a view. So a view from a vantage point, a view from a window, or maybe a view in a painting, a special painting that's on the wall in this character's house. I reckon that'd be a really cool symbolic element. Also, a character's something in a character's mannerism, or to do with their body, like a tattoo or a limp or a scar or something like that. A characteristic is what I'm trying to spit out. Okay, so that is a really good way to get them thinking, brainstorming ways that they can use symbolism to represent their idea, to get their idea across. The next thing, of course, is to have students pepper their writing with those symbols. So a character walks into a room, the Miley Cyrus song, The Climb, is playing in the background, and she plays with the locket at her neck that is in the shape of a torch. I don't know. So that kind of thing. So all of those things are driving and developing the writing and developing that idea. So fantastic springboard is our symbolism for a piece of writing. And I really think that that can work for everyone from sort of intermediate age to our junior high to even our seniors. Really fantastic, as I say, for purpose, audience, idea, and development. Boom, you've ticked all the boxes. Happy days! Enjoy.